there have been false teachings throughout the church, and I'm calling them that, false teachings that say the Lord no longer speaks to his people. That is in direct, basic contradiction to his word, the scriptures, in contradiction to the New Testament. In John 10, he said his sheep know his voice, and they follow him because they know his voice. We're told to earnestly desire spiritual gifts. 1 Corinthians 14, 1 Corinthians 12, and 1 Corinthians 14. Earnestly desire spiritual gifts, especially that you may prophesy. We have Acts 2, 17 and 18. These are clear words, New Testament. In the last days. So if you believe there's going to be a last days, if you even believe the prophecies of the last days, many of which were made by Jesus himself, you've got to believe this. He says, in the last days, he's going to pour out his Spirit. And what is the result of him pouring out his Spirit? Dreams, visions, and prophecy. Old men, young men, male, female. If he's not speaking anymore, how's that going to happen? How's that word going to be fulfilled? It doesn't make sense. The doctrine that God no longer speaks because we have the Bible is one of the most foolish doctrines ever perpetrated. It's in basic contradiction to the scriptures, to the New Testament and the Old Testament. You know, even, you go back and look, even all the places where the Lord gave them all the commandments under the Old Testament. You'll see charge after charge where the Lord commands them to obey his commandments and heed his voice. It wasn't enough to just know the commandments and do all the commandments. Even under the Old Testament, his people were required to heed his voice. And I've talked to so many people who don't believe the Lord speaks anymore because we have the Bible, even though that contradicts the Bible. He doesn't speak. I mean, what he's speaking is not for the same purpose he gave us the Bible. But they say, we don't need it. And I say, well, how did you end up in the ministry? Well, God called me. How did he call you? He spoke to him. I mean, it's every time that I've ever seen. But he doesn't speak anymore, I thought you said. Well, you know, I mean, this is really irrational. Besides, we're supposed to be his bride. The church is supposed to be his bride. What kind of wedding, what kind of marriage would it be if on the wedding day, the bridegroom went up to the bride and said, darling, I wrote this book for you so I'll never have to speak to you again. Flee from any church, any group that does not believe God speaks anymore. It is a false doctrine. It is a false teaching. And it's going to cause you major problems in the days to come if you cannot hear his voice, if you cannot be led by the Spirit, be led by the Lord. And it can cost you your life. It is going to be life and death in the days to come that we know his voice. There's intensity and there are things coming that are that serious. We must know his voice. We must know him. Okay, but that's just the first part. We've got to obey his voice. I remember one time I went several years. I tend to have a lot of prophetic dreams, and they've been very helpful in guidance. And some of them that I forgot, and have made some mistakes, and could go back and see the Lord tried to prevent that. I didn't hear him. I heard him, but then I didn't do it, and I forgot it. I went one time, I went actually for several years, a long time, and I wasn't getting any prophetic dreams. And I inquired of the Lord, Lord, why aren't you speaking to me that way anymore? He said, because you didn't even care about them enough to even write them down. And I would just forget them. I'd get so excited about hearing from him, I'd forget to do what he was telling me to do. And I got a journal out and said, I am not going to do that again. I write down every one. All of a sudden, he starts speaking again. But we've got to, I've been going back through those journals. What did he tell us to do? What is he leading us to do? And I believe every mistake I've made, and I've made plenty, and may make plenty of others. I could have avoided if I had listened, and then when I listened, heeded and done what he said. We've got to become obedient. Now, also, many in these times, one of the prophecies about these times are that many will not heed sound doctrine because they want their ears tickled. They don't want to hear about anything bad. They want to hear about the good stuff. All the joy, and unfortunately, I believe that is radically increased in these times. And we've got to go back to the scriptures and obey the scriptures. It's not just knowing his voice, it's both. We've got to have a hunger for his written word, a desire to know it and to obey it. And we got to be sensitive to when he speaks to us, to his voice, and knowing his voice. Get around those who become a part of a church of those who are at least seeking to know his voice. Get with other people who are seeking to know his voice or who know his voice. And determine yourself, inquire, ask, knock until he opens and starts speaking to you so you can hear him and understand him and follow him. That is the most critical thing we can do to be prepared for these times.